Okay, so we meet Dr. Omigoto, the humagear who performs for a surgery, and Omigoto, doesn't that mean like, good job, like, well done, good job, you did great. But also, you call Dr. Sensei in Japan, don't you? So shouldn't it be Omigoto Sensei? But no, he's Dr. Omigoto. And the nurse Mashido is Mashido-chan. It's just, it feels disrespectful. Like, they just don't want humagear to have titles, so they're cleverly getting around it by calling him Dr. Omigoto instead of Omigoto Sensei. I mean, it's not new to use the English word for characters, like Dr. Maki from O's and Professor Ryoma from Gaim. I understand that this is just a way characters are often named, and I understand that Dr. Omigoto isn't the only character in the whole of Kamen Rider to forgo the Japanese honorific and have the English equivalent instead, but when you apply the context of humagear being treated like, as Horobi so wonderfully puts it, slaves to humanity, when you put into context humagear being mistreated and patronised and looked down on, when you remember all the ridiculous laws of things they're not allowed to do, like get married and hold public office, then having a character be named Dr. Omigoto instead of his name just being Omigoto and calling him Sensei because he is a doctor, it feels weird. It feels like they're saying humagear are so below humans that even specialists don't get honorifics. They need to call him a doctor, otherwise how would anyone know he's a doctor? I mean, his name has to relate to his job, or how will people know what his purpose is? But calling him Sensei would imply he's on the same level as humans. That's just how it feels to me, given the context that we have. Imagine how much of a statement it would have been if Adato used honorifics when talking to humagear like he does humans. Imagine what that one little act would have said. Anyway, 2 minutes into the video and we haven't even started the episode yet. That doesn't bode well, does it? You know what's adorable? Jin going, "Yay, time to attack another hospital," with his hands in the air. You know what's also adorable? Horobi behind him, slightly smiling. This is such a parent and child thing, isn't it? The parent walking behind so they can keep their eyes on the child with a smile as their kid goofs off because, oh, so cute. Horobi has some really interesting lines in this, and even at the time, without the knowledge we have now, it was kind of clear what was really happening. I definitely got the right kind of vibes this early on during its run, just with the way Horobi was acting and speaking. So he says, humanity reaps what it sows. Okay, so this isn't your typical overdone boring case of AI turns evil because they're AI and AIs are inherently evil. This means something happened in the past to cause this. Horobi is telling us there's more to what we're seeing. We of course later learn that Horobi was hacked by the Ark, who had negative data installed by Guy, who got off way too lightly. But also, given that we actively see humans being god-awful to humagear, I kind of assumed this line came from someone who had been mistreated and abused in the past. And seriously, watching this subdued person with terribly painful looking cracks and scars from whatever happened to his earpieces, we may never find out, talking about humanity reaping what it sows, just what were we supposed to think, you know? Even from the beginning, Horobi just screamed abuse victim, you know? It was clear from the beginning that this wasn't all Horobi's doing. It was clear from the beginning that something more was going on, and humans are the ones at fault. And honestly, you can't mistreat and abuse humagear and impose all these degrading rules and then complain when there's an uprising. He then says, now humanity falls out of the hands of its own creations. Which on the surface is saying that humans created humagear and now humagear will be their downfall. But if you look deeper into it, it's also like he's saying, again, that humans caused this and humans will pay the consequences. Human malice caused the Ark. Horobi has just so very clearly been mistreated at the least and abused at the worst. Humans made us who we are today. Screw you. Yes, this is one of those days where we overanalyze individual sentences. I hope you come through. We're 3 minutes in. I find it interesting that at first, when Horobi and Jin were the ones with the upper hand, Jin was walking in front of Horobi, But as soon as Adato appears, Horobi is now in front of Jin, almost as if he's instinctively protecting his son. I know that obviously episode 15 and episode 35 are the two main times Horobi protects Jin, but there are so many little subtle moments of Horobi looking out for Jin. Such is the path laid before us by the arc, Horobi says. So thanks, Horobi, for plainly telling the audience that you've clearly either been hacked or brainwashed or groomed or something by this arc, and there's clearly more going on, and Horobi is following the arc, and none of this is Horobi's own personal plan. You know, so no one will try to claim otherwise. Also, I love the difference between the way Jin fights and the way Horobi fights. Jin kind of goes in head first, and he'll sometimes stumble a bit and he'll move about even when he's not fighting, but Horobi will go in, punch, stop, wait for the next move, then he'll do a really cool kick and stop again and wait for the next bit. Jin is a lot more fluid with his movements, but with Horobi it's a lot more like he's having to process his next move. Even though Horobi does react quickly, he needs all his focus on the movements he needs to be doing, whereas Jin has the freedom to jump about needlessly. To be really arrogant for a second, read from my own paper. And pardon my pronunciation, but Hans Moravec, 1988, observed that it is comparatively easier to make computers exhibit adult-level performance on intelligence tests, and difficult or impossible to give them the skills of a 1-year-old when it comes to perception and mobility. That is, skills considered high-level such as reasoning are easy to program than more low-level skills such as sensory-motor abilities, or the ability to process sensory information such as sight and touch, as well as motion. For example, the chess-playing AI Deep Blue could be programmed to play chess at such an ability that it could even beat a world champion. This would be considered a high-level ability. However, the AI, we're talking about AI who haven't gained singularity, the AI that we currently have today, could not decide on its own to play chess, neither could it hold conversation, a low-level skill, unlike its human opponent. I didn't write this, but also it'd be comparatively more difficult to program an AI to physically pick up the chess piece and put it down than to program an AI to be good at chess. What I'm saying is, Jin jumping up and down excitedly and jumping from leg to leg as Horobi fights is proof that Jin is so much more advanced than the average human gear, because he's not stopping and processing his movements, he's just doing it. And Horobi is much more advanced than the average human gear for being able to create Jin like that. It bothers me so much that this series never really leaned on that. They never took advantage of the AI created by another AI element. They just seemed to drop it and pretend like it didn't matter, even though Horobi was then clearly written as an AI who created another AI. Horobi then says, once we're free from humanity's control, and then we get this really cool glitch effect, we will sever all ties with humankind. Interesting. This sounds so much like Horobi's original goal, his original desire was freedom. He wanted a world where Humagear could live freely. His son could live freely. Humagear could live and exist without being mistreated and abused and forced to work. Even if a Humagear is treated well but still has no career choices of their own, and there's no choice but to do exactly what humans tell them, and they don't have the freedom to say, actually, I'll be handing in my notice, it doesn't matter how nice they're treated, they're still under humanity's control. What I'm getting at is, Horobi has been personally mistreated or abused by humans. He doesn't want that for Humagear, for his son. He wants Humagear to be allowed to live separately from humans, away from human control, live their own lives regardless of humanity, and the arc took that sentiment and twisted it into let's kill all humans then. Then Adato says Humagear are meant to help enrich people's lives, and I'm sorry, are we watching from the entirely wrong viewpoint here? Because it sounds like Horobi wants Humagear to be free and Adato wants to keep them enslaved from where I'm standing. Anyway, they fight, Adato is obliterated very quickly, and now Jin's off in front, flying around the Gigas while Horobi walks behind, because they now have the upper hand again. To be clear, I'm not saying Adato should have been nicer to Horobi personally in this scene because he doesn't know any better yet. Right now, Horobi is the enemy who's talking about killing people. I'm not expecting Adato to be all like, oh no honey, come here, talk to me. It isn't about Horobi, it's the way he's speaking about Humagear in general. That Humagear exists for humans, that's just not a good response. Then we get lines like, we need to prove that humans are still in complete control of Humagear by Fukuzori, the vice president. you know, just to really drive in the whole slavery aspect that no one ever seems bothered by. I mean, you expect lines like this coming from this character. He's established as someone who has this way of thinking. You're not told one thing and then shown another with this character, so the fact that he's saying this doesn't bother me as much because that's who he is as a character. But I'm just saying, when you have one person talking about being free from their oppressors and living individually and not being slaves, and then you have other characters saying, no, we need to show we're completely in control and no, you're made to help us, it's so uncomfortable that this is the side we're watching this from. It wasn't necessarily so much at the time, because again, I assumed we'd get character development and actual arcs, and I assumed since they're actively comparing this to slavery and they're actively talking about being free, that somewhere along the series that would become the goal and we'd end the series with at least the possibility. I didn't expect Humagir to suddenly be free by the end, but I thought at least it would be left open-ended with the possibility of things changing in the future. But instead, Humagir are in the exact same predicament that they were at the beginning. It wouldn't have been this bad if it was just context, but since these are actual words that are being said, and it just stays this way. I know I say this a lot, but it's disturbing. Adato now has a dilemma, and I want to say something good about this first. If Humagir at the hospital are all deactivated, they won't be able to become Magir and attack people, but then the hospital will be left understaffed and people already there will die. So he can mass deactivate Humagir and let people die, or he can do nothing and let more people die. It's like the trolley problem. Do you do nothing and let 5 people die, or sacrifice one person to save the others, but now you have their blood on your hands? More people will die if you do nothing, but if you physically do the thing, the resulting deaths will feel more like your fault. It would be easier to do nothing, but you also feel like you have a degree of responsibility. So I understand having this dilemma. This decision falls on him, and I do love when a Kamen Rider has to make a decision where both results would be bad, but he has to weigh things up and figure out which is less bad. Except I don't see him mulling over the Humagir lives. If he truly viewed humans and Humagir lives equally, then we wouldn't need the extra detail of hospital patients. It should be deactivate Humagir to save humans, or don't deactivate Humagir but put humans at risk. Either way, people will die. I understand that Humagir can be reactivated whereas humans can't, and I would have understood that had Adato actually been portrayed as a super compassionate person if he'd have chosen to deactivate Humagir. If it had been a difficult decision that really affected him and he genuinely felt guilty over doing so, I'd have understood. In fact, I'd have loved that as a scene. Fukuzawa yelling at him about human lives and Adato saying that Humagir have lives too. But that's not what we got. Instead, it's this group of humans versus this group of humans, and the innocent Humagir don't even come into it. The only concern about Humagir in the scene is the market for Humagir collapsing. Fukuzawa tries to order Izu to tell Zeya to deactivate the hospital Humagir, and she says she can't act without Adato's approval. And Fukuzawa says, he's silent, he's not objecting. And honestly, that's such a huge character flaw that easily could have been addressed in a character arc. He is silent a lot of the time. He just lets things happen even though he has the power to stop it. He ignores Humagir suffering in favour of helping humans. In fact, one of my biggest problems with Adato so far is him not reacting to things. And here Fukuzawa is actively talking about Adato staying silent, and this so easily could have become a character moment of Adato realising that yes, he does stay silent a lot, doesn't he? And then actually learning to speak up for Humagir because he can. But of course we don't get that because Adato is practically perfect in every way, so instead we cut to the hospital, Humagir being deactivated, including Dr. Omigoto, who's been pushing Fua down the corridor for the past few hours. And for comparison and further explanation of why I go on about Adato but no one else, Yua is a character who views Humagir as tools, so of course in this moment she doesn't care about Humagir personally. She's much more focused on getting this one Humagir active to perform the life-saving surgery on Fua. And honestly, even if she did view Humagir as alive, if Fua's dying, of course he's going to be the priority. But that's why Fua and Yua get away with things that Adato doesn't, because Fua hates Humagir, and Yua is indifferent but views them as tools, both of which are terrible stances to have, but that's who their characters are. Whereas Adato is supposed to be compassionate and view them as equal, so then when he doesn't do that, that's annoying. And that's why I complain about it so much. Jin's face when he learns they've been shut down. You know you've gone wrong when the so-called villains care more. I'm sorry, but Metsubo Jin and I are way more compassionate than any human in this series. We're 8 minutes into the episode and 15 minutes into the video. Can we afford to break the scene down too? Jin goes, "They were shut down. They were my friends," and starts to walk off with this really dark and angry expression. How you would expect someone to react who genuinely cares. Adato often likes to say that Hyuga are his family, all of them, because they were created by his granddad, so that makes them family, but then he doesn't really care when things happen to them. But Jin views all Hyuga as his friends, and he's distraught and angry about them being deactivated. This isn't about there now being a spanner in the works. He cares about these people, but Horobi stops him. Jin often reacts to Horobi with surprise. I'll get into this again either next video or the video afterwards, I can't remember. But it's during the actor episodes. But I think a lot of Horobi's characterization is told through Jin's reactions to him. The fact that Jin turned and started walking the opposite way, that suggests to me that he cares more about Hyuga than he does the arc's plan. He's abandoning where he should be in order to go and, I assume, get revenge or something. And he does this without even thinking, which would suggest to me that at least a part of Jin expects Horobi to let him go. He's obviously not scared of Horobi, otherwise he'd be saying exactly where he is, where he's supposed to be, because he'd be too afraid to move. But then, when Horobi stops him, he looks back with this, for God's sake, sort of face. It's not with surprise and confusion like I'll talk about within the next few videos. This is a face of someone who's sick to death of being stopped. Like, oh my god, Horobi, you never let me do anything fun. So, part of him expected Horobi to let him go, or at least wasn't afraid to try, but then he's not surprised that he didn't, and it in fact seems like something Horobi does a lot, stopping his son from doing something dangerous. Adato is dwelling on what Horobi said to him when he says, "Hey Izu, I know Metsubo Jin and I are evil Hyuga." And here's the thing. Horobi is presenting as a villain currently. He's talking about killing people. I'm not mad that Adato is calling Metsubo Jin and I evil, because of course that's what he thinks in this given moment. But the thing is, he flashes back to Horobi's words, but the words he flashes back to aren't about killing people. He's flashing back to, "Once we're free from humanity's control, we will sever all ties with humankind." Horobi says some actual villainous things in the earlier episodes, but this is not one of them. In Adato's eyes, it's not wanting to be under humanity's control that makes them evil. He's remembering a Hyuga specifically talking about Hyuga being free from humanity's control. In the same episode, someone actually said, "We need to prove that humans are still in control of Hyuga," and he decided that's what makes them evil? If not for the flashback, I'd have made the case that, okay, he's dwelling on wanting to kill people specifically, which I think is fair. I am losing my mind. Please tell me again why Adato is the most compassionate one. Again, this isn't about his reaction to Horobi specifically, or even to Metsubo Jin and I. I'm not expecting him to be sympathetic towards them yet. This is about his attitude towards Hyuga in general, if he thinks not wanting to be under humans' control makes you evil. Then of course we get Adato idolising Hyuga as angels. Hyuga are so good, he doesn't believe that they can easily just succumb to evil. You know, the evil of wanting freedom, or the evil of being involuntarily hacked. So evil. It's so frustrating because this could have been a wonderful episode. Imagine if instead Horobi talks about Hyuga being free, Adato thinks, wait, what? Fukusori pushes for Adato to deactivate Hyuga because human lives are more important. Izu and Shesta argue over which course of action would result in fewer human casualties. Adato is silent. Later on, he thinks back to Horobi specifically talking about Hyuga being free, and instead of, "Hey Izu, I know Metsubo Jin and I are evil, but most Hyuga are good," it's, "Hey Izu, are we really the good guys? Like, is it really that simple?" And he thinks back to all the previous instances of Hyuga being abused where he just stayed silent. Maybe make the connection that Horobi wants, he doesn't want because he's been hacked by the Ark, he doesn't have the capacity to want, to kill all humans so that Hyuga can be free. And here Adato has just allowed an entire hospital of Hyuga to be deactivated for the benefit of humans. Maybe this could have been the start of Adato saying that humans don't need to be in control of Humagear, that's the problem, and we can make life better for Humagear without killing humans. Humans and Humagear can coexist freely, no one group needs to die for the other, and he's going to reactivate the Humagear staff, and he's going to protect people, because it doesn't need to be humans or Humagear either or. Both can exist and both can live, and nobody needs to choose or be sacrificed. As opposed to just keeping it as Humagear existing to serve humans. Yua storms in demanding to know why Humagear were deactivated because Fura is in hospital right now dying and there's no one to operate on him. And Adato says, "I've never seen you so emotional. You're always just as calm and collected as Humagear." Was this episode just designed to make my blood boil? I know it sounds like I'm nitpicking, but maybe Humagear are calm and collected because when they show emotion they're labelled evil and killed. Maybe also don't give a handful of specific attributes to an entire group of people. Like, oh, all Humagear are calm and collected, well then maybe all humans are arseholes. Oh, I didn't realise that horribly generalising was bad, but Adato's allowed to do it. Besides, I don't think Jin is calm and collected, and he's a Humagear, but he's evil, so he doesn't count. I don't think Kobe could be described as calm and collected. The episode title called him hot-blooded, but then that was a problem, wasn't it? You see what I'm getting at? Humagear are not always calm, but when they're not, they're bad. Who's going to love Humagear if I don't? Adato says. Wow, you have an interesting way of showing how much you love Humagear. We've seen this kind of episode so many times, when the Kamen Rider falters. We see it in Gaim in that harrowing scene where Koto is just on the floor, hugging his knees because he just learned that the first Invis he fought and killed and celebrated killing was in fact his missing friend Yuya. We get it in Ryuki when Shinji thinks he killed Goro-chan, and he's so depressed and distraught that his dragon almost eats him. And when he finds out it was all a trick, he storms right up to Goro-chan and he grabs his hands and he goes, thank God you're alive," and he sinks to his knees and he won't let go, and Goro-chan has to pull his hands free, and Hin Kataoka have already gone by the time Shinji gets up and is like, "Wait, no, I'm mad, stupid bloody lawyer, where did he go?" That is compassion. That is a character being so consumed by guilt over someone he barely knows that he almost let himself die. But this is masquerading as a compassionate scene without actually being one. Yes, wow, the music builds as Adato declares his love for Humagear despite two Humagear apparently being evil because he's so compassionate. He thinks wanting to be free is evil, and he says nothing against humans being in control of Humagear, and he views Humagear as people who exist to serve humans, but who will love them if he doesn't? It doesn't matter how many times Adato says, "I love Humagear, I believe in Humagear," if he then shows the complete opposite. Of course, Humagear are eventually revived. Adato goes off to fight. Yua asks why Izu didn't stop him since he clearly has no chance, and Izu says, "In this company, Adato's will is absolute." No parallel here! Okay, I'll just translate this as Adato has supreme authority, but it's still... Okay, no, I'm going to stop deep diving into lines because this video is already way too long. But I adored Yua and Izu's interaction in this. I thought maybe they would end up going somewhere. Since Yua was a lot closer to accepting Humagear than Fura, I think. Fura hates them, but Yua just views them as tools, so I thought that was probably easier to break through, and I thought this was the start of that. I thought maybe Yua and Izu would start to form some kind of connection. Yua would start to learn to actually not be so dismissive and indifferent towards Humagear, and Izu would have a connection to someone who isn't Adato, since she was created for Adato, she exists for Adato, and I think it should have been important for her to be allowed to form connections with other people outside of her role. Especially since at the end of the episode, Yua comes back to Izu to resume the conversation, but Izu interrupts her to talk about the video of the blue-eyed Ansatz-chan on the news and asks who submitted it. It's Yua, and Izu confronts her about that. They were just interacting really well, and I thought it would go somewhere, which is what I end up saying about most relationships in this series. Yua asks Izu if she thinks Humagear who gain singularity will really harbour goodwill, and Izu is left to think about it, and she comes to the conclusion that she doesn't know, but she believes in Adato, because even when we're believing in Humagear, we're not believing in Humagear, we're believing in the humans who allegedly believe in Humagear. I just hate this idea of all Humagear either harbouring goodwill or harbouring malice. How about some will and some won't, because that's just how people work. And the world is not black and white, and every human gear is their own person with their own potential, and we should be stopping all this all human gear nonsense. However, being dramatic and raising his arm slightly while saying humanity's extinction has come, and Jin looking at him doing this, and then raising his own arms right in the air going, yeah! Aww. And oh my god, over 20 minutes into the video and we finally get to Horobi saying we are not slaves to humanity and that Humagear will inherit the world. It's a darker version of what he was saying earlier about Humagear breaking free from human control and cutting ties with humans. And honestly, Horobi talking about Humagear being slaves to humanity and speaking almost with what seems to be a touch of anger, which is strange for Horobi because he doesn't tend to exhibit that much emotion. But he even closes his hand into a fist when he says this. This is a person who has clearly experienced so much awful stuff. He's speaking with anger about not being slave to humanity. How else were we supposed to see that? But Horobi speaking about this while Jin is just bouncing around oblivious is such a great visual of how I personally see them, with Horobi trying to keep Jin away from all the bad stuff for as long as the arc allows it. I feel like Jin is oblivious to a lot. I don't think he really understands how bad things are, what Horobi's been through. I don't think Jin knows just how much Horobi suffered. I think he knows just as much about Horobi's backstory as we do. Adato wasn't here for that, but he didn't hear Horobi say this. But when he does show up, he says, "I'm going to put an end to your evil." And while we as the audience know better, especially now, it's not Horobi and Jin's evil. And it's always annoying later when he talks to Horobi and Jin as if they are the Ark. But in this moment, this early on, from Adato's point of view, and with the lack of knowledge Adato has, they are attacking a hospital with the intention of killing people. I don't want it to come across like I'm just nitpicking everything Adato says and does, because moments like these I completely understand. Though he does talk like this a lot towards hacked Humagear, that he knows they're hacked and therefore victims. But you know, he's consistent. Anyway, we get a mecha fight, which I always adore. I love giant robotic fighting people things. I wish we had more of that, but then I suppose that's what Sentai's for. Horobi says Humagear will wipe humanity out, and Adato says Hiren's machines exist to help people, and these are two very opposite extremes. Nobody should be wiped out, but also nobody should exist just to help other people. But Adato's is more dangerous, because of course wiping out humanity is bad. Nobody's going to question that. But Adato going on and on about Humagear existing to serve is always treated as a good thing, and retaliation to that is bad. Horobi comes away from the Humagear will wipe humanity out stance, mainly because it wasn't his stance, it was the Ark stance, and only briefly what Horobi kinda wanted after the Ark, because that's what he was taught. I'm not going into that now because this video is already way too long, but still. But Adato never comes away from the Humagear exist for humans stance. Adato says he's going to carry out Hiden's will, and Horobi says Metsubo Jinrai Netto no Ishi no Mamani, and oh my god, how are these not intentional parallels? Just, oh my god, they both need to meet in the middle. Adato is just as bad, why is no bugger seeing this? Horobi says you do seem to defy all calculations, I'll give you that. And this video is already ridiculously long, but I swear to god his voice doubled up at some point in that line, like it glitches. And I don't know if that's an editing error or intentional or what, but it sounds exactly like he does when he's injured in the Ames basement. It's Amaya that glitches a bit. Oh, we're almost at the end, I promise. Fua says now he has two conflicting memories, being attacked by Humagear and being saved by Humagear. And even though we now know the first memory isn't real, that's honestly the perfect way to look at it. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad, that's just how it is, and we shouldn't let one experience paint all bloody Humagear. Fua is doing exactly what I expected him to and starting to come around, good for him. And Adato says, maybe now you'll have a higher opinion of us, and just, or maybe now he'll have a higher opinion of Humagear and stop trying to kill innocent Humagear.